Hey guys, welcome back to the Results Junkies podcast. I am Ed Pizzarello, your prompt engineer for this week's episode, and we are definitely going to dig into that in a little bit more detail. Paul, good to see you again. We're going to be talking a little bit about Skype, but we're going to be talking about them in the past tense since they don't exist anymore. And if we happen to get through both those topics quickly, we're going to be talking about the most affordable pickup truck in the U.S., which is sort of an odd topic for us to fold in. But here we are. Mr. Singh, good to see you.
Good to see you, man. Like I said to you in the pre-show, I think there might be a missing slot of about a week of time in my memory. You texted me about doing some stuff. I responded back, hey, I thought you were in Taiwan. And you're like, no, that was last week. So not sure if I've been abducted or I was just in the throes of deep preparation for my big quarterly board meetings. So other than that, I'm getting abused by the pollen here in Virginia, just like you are, it sounds like. But I sound horrible. I feel fine, but I feel I can barely get a breath in. So if I sound terrible, Jeremiah, I don't know if you can fix this part in post.
There's only so much Jeremiah can fix. He's a miracle worker, but yeah, there's only so far the guy can go. And yeah, the car was yellow when I left the airport and picked it up the other day. It is gross here now, and maybe the reason why you thought I was still in Asia was because most people go to Asia for longer than I went, and I was in Taipei for a whopping 1 day, and then Tokyo for about 5. So
yeah,
I will say, as somebody who's not a Star Wars fan, attending my first Star Wars convention was eye-opening. It is a very fervent fan base.
Your Instagram stories were kind of fun. I'll let people go look at them. I don't know if they'll still be up there, but it seemed kind of fun.
Yeah, have you been to Japan before?
No. I passed through. I was doing a lot of work in Singapore and stuff like that, so I'd pass through Narita, but I never got outside the airport.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that somebody who was with me made a joke because it's like the Japanese are fine with lines; they're actually quite fond of them as a culture standpoint. And her comment was, "Look, if I stood in front of this light pole and my husband stood behind me, a few random people would line up behind us just to see what the line was for." And so there was a line to get into the parking lot for the convention. Then there was a separate line to get through security. Then there was a line that stretched the entire back of this massive convention hall to line up to get into the facility. Then once you got in there was a line to pick up your badge. And then ultimately there was lines for all of the things that you wanted. So definitely lots of queuing. And in true Japanese fashion, I just gotta love them. They're so good at queuing up that where the end of the line was for this toy that my son wanted to get in line for, there was a gentleman holding up a sign in multi-language that said, "This is the end of the line and you can't get on it." So just to make sure people do, it doesn't, you have to stop, please. and in true Japanese fashion, people lined up behind the guy with that sign.
I love it. I love to see it. Yeah, no. Very stark difference from what I'm used to in India, if you've ever been there.
Have not.
No belief in lines whatsoever.
Nice.
That's a different episode for a different podcast.
More like scrums.
It's basically like a large offensive line, really, is what it was.
Right. Well, a little bit of housekeeping for us. Show at resultsjunkies.com is how you track us down. He is at Paul Singh on all those social media channels. I am at Pizza in Motion. At Results Junkies is how you find the show itself. And prompt engineers, as I noted at the top of the show, I've now assumed another role inside our company. I am a chief prompt engineer for RMR Capital, and that's because while this role was incredibly popular a year ago, Paul, it seems that prompt engineers have fallen out of fashion.
Well, I think it's less about them falling out of fashion and more a reflection of how far the models have come.
Yeah.
I'm certainly no expert, but I remember tinkering with a lot of these models last year, and it really was about, what is the right format of the prompt you put in there, and it really did feel like magic when you got it right, but it was terrifyingly, frustratingly annoying. I mean, there were just a lot of expletives and stuff when you were trying to figure it out. So yeah, people were willing to pay a lot of money for it, but I think on the last episode, or maybe 2 episodes ago, we sort of talked about how fast the models are improving. I think some studies are saying that they're doubling in capabilities about every 7 months. So yeah, it's not surprising, but yeah, what a wild world we lived in where you had job offers for $200K, or some of these jobs were listed at $200K. Like, what a world did we live in back then?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think to your point, I think that the prompt itself has become significantly less important in the world of AI. And to your point, I think that shows the quality of the models and how quickly they've learned. I think, one of the things I started noticing recently, which is interesting, comes at a cost for these AI companies because anytime you're crunching more data or thinking about something more, you're using resources. But I had a couple of examples that I gave ChatGPT recently, and they were sort of like open-ended questions about, well, how would I structure a presentation like this? Or, if somebody were in a role like this, what would you expect them to do? And they provided me answers to those, which is what I would expect from the engine. But then the next thing that they posed, I thought was interesting, which was, would you like me to provide you a couple examples of that? Which isn't something that I've seen the models do, and I'm curious if that's something that you've seen, in your experiences.
What specifically, by the way?
Like if they're it's asking, and once it's answered your question, asking if it wants you to show you if I wanted to show me further examples.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I've definitely seen that. Yes. Short answer, yes. It's nice that at least my experience lately has been that, it's nice that it takes that one step further to try to figure out whether you have deeper questions or if you want to move on to the next topic. That being said, I didn't mean to go down this path, but now that I say it anyways, what's interesting is that, so for example, I've been messing around with ChatGPT,
Hmm.
and I think by default it sets you to the O4 model, I think. And then, the most recent sort of updates have been that now there's like a O4 mini and an O3.
Hmm.
What's interesting is, at least in my own very basic usage, is that when there's an error with the O4 model, it's almost always like something very minor. I actually like put in one of the new jobs that we're recruiting for at Strata, and I said, hey, update this with this language or whatever, or with my style or whatever, and it changed. It did it, but then it like went one step further and it changed, like it paraphrased sections that I had to explicitly tell it what sections to not change,
Hmm.
which is not a
Interesting.
deal breaker. It's just annoying.
Hmm.
But when I did that same thing with maybe the O3 model,
Right.
I feel like half the time it was just way off. Like it was like, this is going to be a bad joke, but whenever these LLMs kind of mess up, they call it a hallucination. And I'm like, that's putting it very politely, because this is just plain wrong. This is not
Yeah.
even a hallucination. This is just plain wrong. So I don't know. But back to your point. Yeah, it's interesting that it will kind of understand what I'm looking for. And in some cases, it's able to figure out whether I might want to go further in the line of questioning, and it prompts me
Sure.
for that. But man, there are things that really still burn me up. I'm like, hey, can you just remember that every time I ask you to edit a document, I want you to display it in a format where I can copy paste it into a Google Doc? Like, just remember that. And it's just frustrating that it won't remember that.
Yeah, that would
Uh,
be frustrating. I'm not using it in that way, but you're right. That should be the sort of thing that should be able to accomplish for sure.
yeah,
I still think
yeah,
there's more of a play here, at least initially. I still think that the best value I'm seeing out of it are tools in business, and I guess I won't say disappointed because maybe that's the wrong word. I was initially excited that we were able to use some AI tools to handle phone ordering at the restaurants that we own, Five Guys. I certainly had hoped that there'd be other pieces in the mix that we could use AI for at this point. I haven't seen them develop yet, but on the restaurant side of things, when you talk about, you and I are paying $20 a month for a ChatGPT subscription. I'm paying, I don't know, probably 600 or 700 bucks a month total for 9 restaurants to have phone ordering. So call it almost $100 a month to not have an employee that have to answer the phone, the majority of the time, which I view as a pretty significant labor savings. We haven't seen any drop in the number of customers ordering through that channel, so we feel like customers are adopting it.
yeah,
But I also feel like for an industry like the restaurant industry, and you talk about, your comment was, hey, at any time I give you a document update, I want you to prepare it in a format so I can drop it back into, I don't remember if you said Google Docs or Microsoft Word, but
yeah,
so I think about things like my employees have to inventory the walk-in cooler every 2 days and place their food orders. And so for me, that seems like a really obvious model to say, hey, I'm going to give you a bunch of pictures of our walk-in coolers and our shelves in the rest of the kitchen, and I'm going to tell you what all the boxes are. And once you've memorized what all the boxes are, I'm going to
Mhm.
take a picture of my walk-in cooler, and then you're going to prompt me with questions of, hey, I see 2 cases of tomatoes on the shelf. Can you just check and make sure they're full? Or, hey, what's the date on that lettuce box? I can't see it. Those sorts of things. But more importantly, when I go to place my food order, it's reading that food order and saying, hey, Ed, I noticed you didn't order ground beef. You're a burger restaurant. What seems to be the issue there? It feels like that's, a ripe next level of technology for these sorts of products. And I just haven't seen anybody working on those sorts of things yet. Maybe I'll see that. There's an upcoming trade show, a pretty big trade show in Chicago for the restaurant industry. So maybe I'll see that there. But I haven't seen it expand into workplace assistance yet in the food service industry. And given just how many restaurants there are in the restaurant industry and how many people there are in the restaurant industry, it feels like there's an incredible opportunity to take the sort of the clerical tasks that you and I are using ChatGPT for and expand it, pretty exponentially.
I didn't anticipate us to go down this path, but this is an interesting, thought to maybe unpack is that, if you think about the people that are developing these AI tools right now,
Yeah.
and by the way, I should say, so let's just for the sake of discussion, let's say there are the people and the companies that are working to make these models better.
Yep.
And for the sake of this, where I'm going with this, then there's a separate group of people that are working to commercialize this. So to your point, you're going to go to this conference. You're hoping to see interesting companies that are taking these models and then applying them to specific business problems like the one you just described.
Right.
I don't know how to articulate this, but something I've been thinking a lot about is that, in order for these specific types of use cases to be solved, you almost need direct access. For example, in your example, you need direct access to somebody that has a lot of these refrigerator units around the country that's maybe willing to put a camera in there, willing to ask an employee or two to become the interface to this thing. The point is that it's coming from the outside. It's like sort of this external vendor trying to come in your case, to a chain of restaurants to say, hey, we can make it better for you. I sometimes wonder actually at what point will a company like, Five Guys or even us at Strata think about hiring these people in and bringing them inside the fold. And I don't know where that's going, but like I think about it in the context of even our, specific use cases, right? So it's like,
Right.
you know, how do we make this type of employee more efficient by offering up solutions on the screen and stuff like that? For us in particular, because there's patient data involved, it's much, much more difficult for us to work with a third party vendor.
Mm.
And so I guess where I'm going with this is that, in a lot of the other industries that you and I have invested in as well, it's not uncommon for a vendor to kind of say to a business, hey, we can help you make that workflow better. I mean, look, look, even like big companies like Deloitte, that's what they do, right? They come
Yeah.
in from the outside and help you management consult your way to greatness. Air quotes, of course. But on the other side, this is a very specific kind of thing that you're talking about, which I think is really where the real power of these models will be unlocked.
Well, and
But
I take it a step further. You talked about like somebody coming in and installing cameras and stuff like this. I mean, every one of my employees already has their inventory device. They have phones. For those that are watching, see me holding it up. You don't need extra technology. The technology already
it's
exists. The phone has massive compute power.
it's the
So,
commercialization of it. Yeah.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
like I have an app on the phone to order food. The food provider has that. So, what's the next logical step? Okay, well, help automate that process for me.
Yeah.
So I think all that stuff is coming, but I think that's where you can really start to lever up the revenue for these things. I guess we should have framed this up earlier. Just a reminder to folks, I'm looking to invest in 10 travel startups a year for the next 5 years, and I do see obviously lots of travel applications for AI, but this is one of those restaurant applications. Like, hey, if you're out there thinking about ways to disrupt the restaurant industry, let me just tell you, it is a very tech averse industry, and a lot of the tech that we have is fairly low tech. And I do think people could put a little bit of thought behind some AI models. And the reason why I think this stuff can be so successful in the restaurant industry is not necessarily because it's gonna take us leaps and bounds. It's that, let's just say it takes a typical employee an hour to do a food order. That's probably over exaggerating the time a little bit, but let's call it an hour. But the more important part is risk reward, because when you train a new employee on that, well, the new employee takes a number of times to get the order right, and I have to invest time as a leader to
Yeah.
supervise them. And the risk reward is they forget to order the ground beef, or they forget to order hamburger buns, like some of the really important critical stuff to be able to run our restaurants. Soap. Well, again, like AI can put bumpers around all of that stuff. And then because of the sheer number of restaurants that are out there, tens of thousands of McDonald's and Subways, thousands of Starbucks, if you have something that works in one restaurant, you can charge them whatever you charge them per month. It's very easy to replicate the model. Once it works in five Starbucks, it should work in 500 Starbucks, and it should work in 5,000. So that's where I think there are really exploitable industries, restaurant industry being one of them, where I expect AI to be doing more.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, you can take a pass on this if you want. I know you've used the example of forgetting to order the ground beef or something like that. I imagine that's not actually what normally happens. I imagine what's more likely to happen is
Really?
somebody over orders on something that expires. No?
Oh, I mean, that happens too. Don't worry. I mean, this is the great thing about the restaurant industry. If there's a way to break it, my employees have figured it out. Yes. Yes. No. Yep. They can figure it out. Now, and there are simple parameters we put in place. And, if an employee doesn't place an order for ground beef on an order, the food purveyor automatically adds a certain number of cases of ground beef. So like there
It's like
are
a, yeah,
very, very basic,
it's like
parameters.
fuzzy. Yeah, there's like fuzzy parameters there that
Yeah,
get you there.
there's no machine learning or AI. It's just, if SKU X is 0 or absent, then 20 SKU X, sort of things.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
very basic.
Yeah.
I think I could actually probably write that program. That's probably the only one that I could write.
Ah, look at you. Prompt engineering. Now you can prompt engineer your way into your own product.
Well, I
Nice.
am chief prompt engineer here at Results Junkies, so I take my role seriously. I am also chief ridicule officer, and I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am to be able to recite one quote from the next article that we're going to talk through,
All
and
right, let's do it. Let's
and
do
that's
it.
the demise of Skype. And it's been a little bit over a decade since Microsoft bought them for some horrendously large number at the time. And Skype, by the time this episode goes live, will no longer exist. Microsoft having decided to sunset it. And I think, Paul, while there are lots of ways to take this, the article is very tongue in cheek about it, but for the multi-billion-dollar acquisition that Microsoft completed here to acquire Skype, you would have hoped that there would be significant learnings on how to make video calls and collaboration more effective for end users for all of that investment in learning. And yet here we are.
Well, I think that I, look, I I can't remember the last time I used Skype. I mean, it must have been 15 plus years ago. So I'm actually surprised it's still around this long. I hadn't thought about it in a decade or more. But at the same time, I think it's important to if clearly this writer was somebody needs to check on this author and make sure somebody hasn't hurt them. Like this is, they're having a bad day. But at the same time, when I think about, early stage investing and all that, and any of the companies that have gone on to return, significant wins back to me,
Yeah,
they almost certainly always seem like a joke at the time, looking back.
sure.
But at the time, it was like they were sort of cutting edge. So looking back, considering how far things like Zoom and FaceTime and Meet have come,
Yeah.
it's definitely easy to look back and be like, how did we even put up with Skype at the time? That is a fair thing. On the flip side, let's also remember that prior to Skype, I don't think there was anybody that was, like Skype by the standards of the time when it was blowing up was wild.
Yeah.
I remember my own family. The reason we started using Skype back then, as in this, I'm just remembering it on the fly here. I feel like it was probably 20 years ago, and it was my mom's side of the family still is like spread out between England and Denmark and other places. And Skype was such a novel thing because even without the video, we could call without any costs,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
which was at the time was a massive thing. I mean, it
That
was
was no question. That was a huge part of Skype was reducing the cost of international calls to effectively zero.
right, right. So it's like obviously if I was talking to a doctor overseas where the connection can't drop, you have to accept the cost of having to pay the phone company for that reliability. But hey, if I'm calling my cousin in 2003 to catch up and the call drops a couple times, not a big deal. So by the way, I'm not subtly saying I wish Skype still existed. I just think it's worth pointing out that in almost any technology, when we look back, it's just funny to think about what we accepted. I mean, like I'm looking at my iPhone 16 or whatever the latest version is, And I'm thinking back to the fact that for iPhone 1 or whatever they called it back then, I didn't quite get it because I was perfectly fine with my BlackBerry Pearl.
Yeah.
But
Oh
looking
God, I
back,
love the
I'm like,
BlackBerry.
what in the world was I thinking?
I don't know.
Um,
I still kind of miss the keyboard, the physical keyboard on the BlackBerry. I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie. Call me a
yeah, yeah,
dinosaur, but I'm not gonna lie about that.
yeah. I mean, it is interesting to see how far we've come though, right? Because like
Sure.
even now, you and I are on this recording software, and even now it sort of like locks up every once in a while, and it's frustrating, but at the same time, it wasn't available to any of us prior to COVID. You know,
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure how we would have done this before COVID. Anyway, it's wild, but I'm glad to see it go. I'm surprised it kept it around this long. And was it really a multi-billion-dollar acquisition? I guess I should have Googled this, but is that what
Oh
they
yeah.
paid for it?
Yeah. No, it was. It's in the article here. Let me find it real quick. 8.5 billion in 2011 for a
It was a
product
lot of
that
money.
and I'm not an expert on this. I don't think Skype. I mean, I think a very small percentage of Skype users paid anything because I think a lot of them used it the way you used it, which was
Yeah.
for free video or audio calls overseas. I remember a time where I don't know, like maybe you had to pay 10 cents a minute or something like that for like larger chunks of time or something like that. That like vaguely sounds familiar, but nothing that would approach an $8.5 billion valuation in 2011, for what they were able to get out of this technology.
Yeah. Well, certainly nobody's getting fired at Microsoft for paying 8.5. You know, those guys have enough cash on the balance sheet, I'm
They
sure,
do. Yeah, they do.
but it also kind of points out how difficult it is to integrate companies like that as well. You know, I see it even on our side of the business with Strata, like some of our competitors, you know, some of the challenges they're having is because, you know, you've gotten past the acquisition of whatever you're going to acquire, but then the integration is just an afterthought. And
Yeah.
so, but man, this author, by the way, again, like somebody check on this person, make sure they're okay, because the lines they are just paragraph by paragraph. They're just the zingers are great. Like death, Skype was a great equalizer. It worked just as poorly on an Android phone as it did on a brand new MacBook. It
Well,
accepted us in our filterless imperfection, and all it asked in return was that we rate the quality of the call on a scale of 0 to 5 stars. It's so good. Like I want this guy to write my obituary. This is really
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I gotta say, in one of the last paragraphs, what has to be my favorite line in my continuing very single-minded goal for informing the world how wonderful Microsoft Teams is, because it seems like I'm one of the only people that seems to espouse this view. The author has just like a wonderful, wonderful paragraph here. Are your handful of loyal users really now expected to migrate over to Microsoft Teams, an app that raises the question, what if a tool meant for professional collaboration was completely incapable of making calls?
I just saw the author's name, Miriam. All
Yeah.
right, Miriam. I hope you're okay. Some somebody send Miriam some like a hug or something.
I am just as triggered as Miriam is by this article. I just want to say, for the record, I'm just as triggered as her.
I think Miriam's side hustle should be a whole new column just reviewing new products. I feel like I would pay for that column.
uh, all right. You want to try and tackle pickup trucks for just a few minutes before we run away, since
Why,
you are a blood-sucking capitalist and a
why
full-time
not?
truck
Let's do it.
driver?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Bezos is getting into the world of cars, which I find interesting. Like my first impression when I read this article was, wow, like do we really need another connected car? But I took a step back when I read it just because it is very different. And so Slate is a new automobile coming to the U.S. that Bezos is helping fund. And effectively, what they're talking about is a very affordable entry level vehicle. In this case, it's an EV pickup truck that should start at or under $20,000 and uses novel concepts like manual window controls. So the old fashioned crank arm. And there are lots of affordable cars overseas. A lot of them are smaller, built on smaller platforms. But in the US, I mean, there's a handful that are down around this price. But the cars that maybe you and I think as entry level cars are, closer to $30,000, like a Honda Accord. And then if you were to go with a popular overseas pickup truck, like a Toyota Tacoma, for example, you're talking much more than $28,000 to get yourself into a
Yeah.
Tacoma. So it's just an interesting entry into the market. And when you think about AI as a whole and EVs and all this, the emergent technology, they've, for lack of a better term, they've really been built around rich people up until now.
Well, I don't know if they were built particularly around rich people. Rather, they were built at a time when capital or access to capital was probably easier than it's ever been. I think, I mean, look, you and I think for the most part of our adult lives, interest rates for car purchases, if you're going to finance them, which we know the vast majority of Americans do, they'd probably be like 1.9, 2.9, maybe at its peak in like 2010, maybe it was like 4.9, 5.9, something like that.
Sure.
So I don't know that it was necessarily about, how I, like, for example, I remember the Ford Explorer when I was in high school. That was like in the 90s, like the Ford Explorer was just crushing. It was just selling it. Everybody wanted to be in that car. And
Yeah.
I just remember in hindsight, because I was at CarMax, right? So I could see
Hmm.
the prices go up. And, I was like 17, 18 at the time. So it's not like I could have afforded them. I just watched the prices go up. It's like, well, the core car kind of isn't like worth 5 grand more. It's just, I think that magically the cost of something became like what people could afford. It's almost like, they wanted you to finance it. So anyway, I'm rambling here. The point is, I don't think that they were engineering for rich people. I think rather anybody could get access to lots of credit, and that's what was happening. But this kind of goes the other way. Like it's sort of, who knows whether or not this company will be successful. But one of the interesting things is they're questioning everything that we thought would be normal. So like, for example, I'm probably not in the demographic of somebody that would drive this. I got too many kids and, I'm in a different
Right.
part of my life right now. But at the same time, the idea of like there's no paint colors. It's just it's about wraps.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating because that's a huge cost center during
Of
production.
course. Yeah. And it also ties you down on inventory too, because now somebody wants the red one.
Right. And so then you think about like, right, exactly. So now you're a dealer. If they're, who knows, maybe they're going to go the Tesla route. But now as a dealer, you're just buying the unit and you're wrapping at the point of sale. It's even if this company isn't successful, it'll be interesting to see if any of the ideas are embraced by others. I mean, I remember, I'm not like putting aside whether or not you're a fan of Tesla. The thing is, like, in hindsight, everybody was like, Tesla, are you crazy? You're like, electric cars is never going to work. Next thing you know, all the big three manufacturers are like, we are, investing in electric cars, and then all of a sudden Tesla pushes out this like supercharger network. The other guys aren't able to keep up. And now magically, all of a sudden, everybody's doing a deal with Tesla to use their superchargers.
Right.
So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if like this forces the big three to maybe create lower end models, and maybe they won't frame it as lower end, but if the market is willing to maybe pay less and accept roll up windows, does that encourage, like let's use F-150s as an example.
Yeah.
F-150s, for better or for worse, are like the number one selling truck in America. And I think one of the headlines recently was that like now the highest end F-150 starts at over 100 grand or something like that. But, so they've got all these like tiers, right? They've got like the
Right.
$50,000 work truck all the way down to up to like the $130,000 Raptor R or whatever, right? But does
Yeah.
this force them to come in with like the F-150 Lite, and it's got more stripped features because they want to get down into this price point. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Well, and I think this is a real thing. It's like I've heard, and I'm not trying to knock on Tesla or anybody else. Like I've heard Tesla talk about wanting to get down into a more affordable price point and make cars for the masses. Certainly other manufacturers like Rivian, don't offer vehicles that are under $50,000. In fact, I don't think there's a Rivian cheaper than like 70. But I just Googled it while you and I were talking. The cheapest Teslas are in the mid 40s, with a market interest rate right now. That's still almost $1,000 a month for a car loan. None of my line staff employees in any of my restaurants can afford a
Mm-hmm.
$1,000 a month for a car payment. That's So I still think these are mostly. Still think what's out there for quote unquote EVs with AI is mostly unapproachable by the masses.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's totally fair. Well, let's see. I'll be curious to see if one of these things actually shows up on the roads around us in Virginia. Maybe
Yeah.
we're not the right demographic. I don't know, but what's that other? electric vehicle company, the one that is supposed to be building like vans for Amazon or something like that. I remember their manufacturing facility is in Illinois. It's
That's Rivian. Yeah,
oh, is
Rivian's
it
building.
Rivian?
It is.
Yeah,
They
I'd be
they have, they
interested
have
to see.
commercial. They have resident well personal vehicles too.
Yeah, like I'm seeing their like the R1s and the
Hmm.
whatever they're called, the
Yeah,
R1Ts and the R1Ss. I'm seeing those everywhere. I think there's like
yeah,
4 in our neighborhood now.
yeah.
So that's happening. But on the other end, like I thought the big promise of that company was that they were going to ship like fleets of these electric delivery trucks out to Amazon, and maybe that's still coming down the pipe. But
Yeah, I've seen some of the fleet delivery vehicles, but not a ton yet. And maybe to your point, maybe they're in other areas of the country and not in our area because there are a lot of last mile independent drivers in our
yeah,
area that drive. So maybe they're not as applicable here. Maybe they're more popular in like densely urban areas and stuff like that. I don't know.
actually, that's an interesting point. By the way, is that I wonder if these cars aren't really designed for maybe people like you and me with families or whatever. Maybe they're actually designed for those last mile delivery people.
Yeah, I mean they could be because like I think like I know some folks in my neck of the woods who drive for Amazon and stuff like that, and they drive in their personal vehicle and they pick up X number of packages because they have distance to drive between each stop. So the amount of
Right.
packages a driver can deliver in a day isn't necessarily a full van in every area. Where in urban environments where you have units that go vertical, it's a lot
Yep.
easier to fill a van.
Yep. 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 Well, separate conversation for a different time. I
Yeah.
can't even imagine what a pitch deck looks like for this. It's like, okay, hear me out. I want to start a new car company.
Yeah, yeah. There you go.
I don't even know how I'd respond to that. I'd be like, okay, is this April Fools? What's going on
Right,
around
right,
here?
right, right. Yeah, and then how much money does that take? Yeah, well,
Yeah.
well, I think this is a good place to pin it for this week. Are you on the road this week or are you home?
No business travel this week. Dana and I are going on a vacation down to St. John next week, so that'll be fun.
Again, you're out, man. You're always down the islands. I love it.
Well, we're not at the level that you are, but twice a year, Dana and I try to get out of here and just the two of us. And so that's twice a year is what we do for St. John.
Mhm.
I love my kids. We had a great spring break. I love them. But you know that when kids are at the ages that we're at, they're really not vacations. They're trips with kids. And I love them to death, but it's really just expensive chicken tenders not at your house. It's- so, but anyway, no, we'll be in St. John, and then I got a couple trips in May, everywhere from Nashville to Salt Lake to a couple other places in between. Waco, I think. We'll see how it goes. But how about you? I feel like you're just like my travel's like amateur hour compared to yours, though.
Oddly enough, I'm gonna finish recording here, download the files, send them over to Jeremiah, and then I need to start packing because I'll be on the road here shortly.
Go Vegas or somewhere else?
Chicago for the week. It's Freddie's week. Freddie Awards, the best in loyalty as voted on by the traveling public. So for the 35th time, we'll be giving away the Freddie Awards in Chicago this week.
I
So,
love it. All
yeah.
right, man. Well, I
Something
will be
new for a
living
change.
vicariously through your Instagram.
Cool.